The 103-year-old Kirk Douglas made millions from his time in Hollywood. Michael, his son, amassed an empire worth $300 million and became even wealthier. However, upon reading Kirk's will, there was no mention of Michael. Strangers, not family, received $50 million. The judgment shocked the entertainment industry. Murmurs circulated around resentful arguments and feuds within families. However, True Kirk's decision to separate from his children was not motivated by anger. What Michael found in the last letter from his father shifted the focus. Unveiling the tragic truth behind this bequest will rendered mute. Heir Danlovic, better known as Kirk Douglas, was born on December 9, 1916, in a little clapboard home in Amsterdam, New York, located at 46 Eagle Street. The man's folks had ran away from the pilgrims who had massacred entire villages in Shavizi and Belarus, filled with nothing but terror to residential areas. They came to the United States in search of a safe haven. Yet, nothing was discovered was a financial hardship. Neither running water nor a decent restroom were available in the house. Harry, the person he very Saturday, my dad would bring home scrap metal and rags that he could sell for a penny. His mom, Fina, used a single stovetop to feed 7 kids. One of the class they argued over. The bread was pushed to its very limit. What the kids swapped clothing, sleeping quarters, and starvation. Listening to his father speak Yiddish as he grew up, his parents fought over money, and he saw his father squander what little they had on alcohol. Snack sales have increased by 5, the mill employees, on occasion for the price of a nickel. In his younger years, he served in a variety of small capacities for over 40 years and yet often went to bed hungry. He felt cramped in the house because of his drunken father and his 6 sisters, and because his wrath could fill every room. On occasion, Harry would disappear for weeks at a time, leaving Brina to care for 7 kids were fed with practically nothing. That house felt like a prison to Heir. In subsequent times, he emphasized his intense need to escape, that the stress and embarrassment stoked a fire within him. Because he was aware of what people would see, he despised welcoming them home. Being poor was never out of the blue. That need to get away drove him toward aspirations that were too lofty for a young boy in Amsterdam. His initial experience with performing when he read aloud a poem titled The Red Robin of Spring while in kindergarten, and he was jolted by the thunderous applause. He continued acting in high school, appearing in even if his classmates made fun of his immigrant name and accent in school plays. His educators assured him he was rejected, the type, yet he continued to ignore or downplay any criticism directed at him. In light of he intended to major in theater when he graduated in 1934. However, the two of them, nobody in the family had any extra cash to pay for school. As a result, he hitchhiked over 160 traveled to St. Lawrence University with a meager $163 and managed to convince into an unattainable scholarship. He did the job of a janitor there for spent $1 every night cleaning schools and subsisting on 20 cents per day, completed each day of his student wrestling career without a loss. Though he was the position of student body president, which is a remarkable achievement for a Jewish immigrant youngster from in the town in question. He received his English degree in 1939 and vowed to himself to use it for the rest of his life, in order to assist pupils who were in a similar situation to his own. Once he finished college, he enrolled from 1939 to 1941 at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts and completed under a different guise. A name he plucked from a hat, Isidore Dembski became Kirk Douglas, someone he came across in the phone directory. His skills in radio and small theater productions, although he encountered persistent hostility due to his Jewish heritage, he was excluded from fraternities. The casting directors openly made fun of him. Just one, he found out later that the sole reason he was turned down for a Broadway role was due to his background. The rejection came without an explanation. A painful, he vowed then and there that he would not let anyone else put limitations on him because of that rejection. He went so far as to competed in carnival wrestling matches while posing as Izzy the Strong, winning $50 each match that night for vicious brawls that afflicted him with a fractured nose and welts that persisted for weeks. With that sum, he was able to fund his acting training and discovered the extent to which he was prepared to sacrifice aspires to. A soda jerk at the was his first legitimate acting gig, the St. James Theater in the year 1940. His weekly income was a meager $30, and he would spend his breaks watching players practice, dreaming of the day they could perform on that platform. This was his debut on Broadway. The audition ended in failure. The moment he stood before the producers, he froze that went out in shame after being booed. He considered leaving, but ultimately decided against it to give in to humiliation and persist in seeking redemption. All the while, he was involved with Lauren Beale's sister Betty Persk, and he became wealthy thanks to her family that really feel like a bugger. A $2 diner supper seemed unattainable. He shattered objects left and vowed to myself that I would not rely on anyone for my survival in the future. By 1941, serving aboard the USS after enlisting as a sub-lieutenant in the U.S. Navy 1139, a submarine chaser that was heavily involved in many Pacific engagements. There was Athi were attacked by a Japanese torpedo bomber. Tragically, 16 of his crewmates perished in the catastrophic event. A depth charge burst through Douglas to the ground, seriously injuring his abdomen, as a result of which he suffered lifelong trauma. He was bedridden for weeks due to malaria after enduring shrapnel wounds and suffering from the aftereffects of remains adrift at sea. Throughout his life, he bore the burden of it and put your everything into every subsequent demanding role. By 1945, he had returned to New York, looked for ways to revive his acting career. His first Broadway show only paid $7 per week. He was survived on $5 a month while waiting tables at restaurants while living in a cramped flophouse room. Keep going. For financial reasons, he also tutored kids in theater. I Have No Idea was a breeze. Lauren Beale, however, intervened once more. His casting was suggested by her that where Martha Ivers is involved in the strange love mystery. Director Halb Wallace observed Douglas in 1946 that engage him for the job. Upon its June 1946 London premiere and subsequent then on July 25th, critics paid close attention in New York. Douglas was elevated a small part into a dramatic performance that changed his trajectory in an instant. During 1947, he performed the role of Whit Sterling in the film Out of the Past, a villain so icy and crafty that it changed the way studios perceived him. Conflict arose on set as he would not allow producers to let them control every decision. He became known for his independence. That he co-starred alongside Burt Lancaster in the film I Walk Alone the same year, and they both on and off-screen feuds gained notoriety. Equal billing was sought by Douglas, and the subsequent dispute ignited a grudge that lasted for 20 years. Their relationship's strain provided their scenes a spark that viewers adored. The major achievement he had arrived in 1949 alongside Champion. Real boxers were his trainers, and he took actual punches in training that was injured while filming, breaking 3 ribs. He came back even though production stopped at adamant that they proceed. On April 9, 1949, the film premiered, and it Medea was his initial nomination for an Oscar. To top it all off, he got a nose job in order to safeguard it throughout filming, and the crew was instructed to choreograph each punch in Champion. He became famous. Out of sight, the war raged on. Mr. Arthur Kennedy, he was almost involved in an altercation with his co-star when she accused him of scene theft. A lot of people thought Douglas wanted to be infectious yet draining. Because of that ambition, he became someone that Hollywood could keep in mind. After tackling Young Man with a Horn in 1950, he dove headfirst into his intense trumpet training caused him to often argue with director Michael Curtis. Douglas played solos on the spot while during production, experienced delays in shooting schedules, and was briefly let go. However, The film's emotional intensity came from its dedication. In the same year, he gave a performance at Glass Menagerie on Broadway, portraying a poet who had failed and who brought back memories of his younger self. His detractors lauded him. However, theater purists were enraged, and he was pushed aside when he turned down a Tony Award to concentrate on movies deeper into the embrace of Hollywood. Coming up next was 1951's Ace in the Hole. Douglas featured as a merciless journalist who turns a tragic event into a news event. Because of the film's bleak tone, Paramount decided to yank it from theaters. It was deemed too startling and nasty by critics. Viewers failed to grasp it entirely, but it wasn't until decades later that it was hailed as a masterpiece. The debate only served to solidify Douglas's fame, since he had crafted one of the most daring figures in early American cinema. Playing the role of Jonathan Shields in 1952's The Bad and the Beautiful, everyone in town could feel it. He immersed himself in the lives of the real-life Hollywood moguls with dread and mastery, and then immersed himself in the part to the point that the line's reality and performance faded away. While filming, he would withhold cues and abandon your co-stars, letting their frustrations boil over for the sake of the camera to manage to land a genuine one. Later on, director Vincente Minnelli acknowledged that the conflict created electricity in the movie. Douglas wasn't bothered by the mind tricks, even if some of the performers were. He had absorbed the memories of powerful individuals manipulating others as a child and imbued Shields with that trait. A total of 5 Oscars, and became a scathing indictment of Hollywood's penchant for consuming its own while ostentatiously celebrating others. Because of his intimate familiarity with the world, Douglas's performance struck a chord. He discovered 2 years after that confronting an entity that is considerably more bizarre than Hollywood. In 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, on set with the 1954 Sea, the enormous animatronic squid designed to frighten spectators almost swept him away. As the tank scene unfolded, the equipment became stuck and entangled in him while remaining taut. In order to rescue him, members of the crew dove into the sea. The tale grabbed headlines, and production was down for days. Douglas continued, when people start making fun of Disney's effects and referring to squidfish, it might lead to chaos. Cuisine, and even working it into the plot. Scenes have to be shot a second time that the film remained cohesive because of his composure under duress. Upon its completion, played in theaters, it earned about $28 million, or around $281 million today. The courage he displayed on TV was believable since it was based on instant just before he passed away. In 1956, a role that was on the verge of breaking his person. In Lust for Life, he played the role of Vincent van Gogh and starved himself till he got rid of 20 pounds. He kept a sketchbook on him at all times, painted in the breaks between takes, and Lethe is engulfed by the character's loneliness. On set, rumors circulated that he took on a new identity. Vincente Minnelli, the director, claimed he transformed into Vincent. His co-stars spoke highly of his growth, anxious, paranoid, and prone to spending hours alone in his trailer on occasion. At the time after production came to a close, he threw himself into therapy and struggled for weeks to recover, resumed as before. His 3rd Oscar nomination came from The Makeover, though it contributed to the film's gross of almost $5 million, or around $50 million in today's currency. Since it was his pain as well, critics could sense it in every picture. In 1957's Paths of Glory, which came out a year later, he offered Stanley Kubrick what could be the most daring moment. That a heated tirade delivered by his character, Colonel Dax, was not originally scripted. Since Kubrick allowed him to improvise, the raging inferno within him was instantly identifiable. Douglas drew on his personal experiences throughout the injustice he had witnessed as a young soldier, and from his own memories. That setting was so raunchy that it was prohibited in France until 1975. In his pursuit of truth, Kubrick insisted on interminable retakes, and Douglas offered him all that he has. Reason enough to study that speech even now. It feels rather than an actor reciting lines, it sounded like a man talking from the heart. Subsequently, that very Douglas appeared in Gunfight at the OK Corral that year alongside Burt Lancaster. In his game, he starred a knife-wielding Doc Holliday smoked actual cigars till he choked. Red blood cells. On screen, the realism was effective, but tensions were rising behind the scenes that a weeks-long profit dispute ensued between producer John Houseman, Douglas, and Lancaster. Disagreements nearly halted the film. After the fact, Douglas claimed that the cigars kept him in character and assisted him in disguising the tension caused by the continual arguing. Over $11 million, or more than 11, amount in today's currency. His connection with Lancaster was severely harmed for years due to the feud. With the start of the 1960s, he found himself in an unfamiliar kind of battleground. Brino was born in 1955. Productions and risked all to alter the course of Hollywood history. Upon employing Dalton using a blacklisted writer as an open credit, Trumbo wrote Spartacus in 1960 while the Red Scare was at its peak. Trumbo had served time in prison and had several years of writing using aliases. Douglas was well aware that siding with him may spell disaster for his career. He was alerted by others that his work would be complete. Warnings were disregarded by him. He made it clear that Trumbo see your name listed there. With that ruling, the blacklist was finally lifted in 1961, and the careers of scores of people were revived. Forgotten creators. Threats received by Douglas, and the subsequent both the terror he felt and the satisfaction he had from standing up for what was right. The story of Spartacus began to represent bravery even before the film's release. That bravery accompanied him to the set. The makers of Spartacus used in the arena revolt seen 8,000 extras dressed as full-length Roman gladiators. A chariot stunt failed in the mayhem. Douglas fractured his jaw after being tossed. Due to the tight production schedule, he declined narcotics, cognizant that they would impair his concentration. He frowned, tightened his jaw and teeth, and then headed to the emergency room to wrap up the scene. For Academy Awards later, and Douglas's injury got entangled in its mythology. That was just the beginning of Douglas and Kubrick's conflict. They fought so fiercely throughout Spartacus so vehemently that Douglas replaced Kubrick as director. Not long after that, Heir requested Kubrick to come back since they knew the film needed his vision. Reshoots were required by Kubrick upon his return. Douglas simultaneously referred to him as an impossibility and a genius. When they squabbles became ingrained in the film's mythology, illustrating the power of a clash of ideas while still coming up with an outstanding product. A brief time prior to Spartacus, Douglas overcame completely different obstacles. In 1958, he was on set for The Vikings traveled to Norway in order to film authentic scenes in the frigid fjords. The man plunged headfirst into the frigid water again and over again till he contracted pneumonia. Manufacturing grew from a single 2 months and an additional $1 million. Eventually, the local group demanded a raise and went on strike as a result. Things came to a standstill as Douglas made a full recovery. The overarching themes of the film were its expansive landscapes and the unyielding reality of Douglas. Still, he bore the burden of his body's toll for a long time. Once again, peril was about in 1959's The Devil's Disciple. A demolished church, unforeseen beams fell on the set, ensnaring extras. Douglas quickly assumed control after being in a position to witness the incident's rapid occurrence that he yelled out instructions, led others out of the building, and assisted in retrieving survivors from the debris. Because of his swift response, what may have resulted in disaster. His story went viral in Hollywood, and soon he was seen as more than simply a star. When faced with adversity, as an innate leader. He was molded by the sense of fairness in all part he played. He portrayed a military commander in the 1964 film 7 Days in May who makes a coup official. During the Cold War, it was a treacherous story. The idea of adding discussions of civil rights that weren't envisioned in the initial script. John, the director Douglas flat out ignored Frankenheimer's requests to maintain order and safety. He was hoped the persona might represent something genuine. The intensity of their disagreements escalated at this point was so powerful that it almost halted production. At its conclusion, the picture was among the most significant political thrillers of the time because to Douglas's determination not to dilute honest assessment. Something far more intimate confronted him in 1966. On set with The Wile and Sicily on a mission of brotherhood, the helicopter he was in went down. His skeleton back and had to recuperate for a while. He continued to feel the agony through how had lived. After the crash, he changed. Moving away from heavy-handed action parts, he focused on generating and supporting humanitarian projects. Subsequently, he compared the crash to should respect life more than fame. He showed no signs of slowing down as he got older. With a 69-year-old, he worked with Burt Lancaster again in 1986 on Tough Guys. He leaped from hours performing a stunt on a moving train when he dislocated his shoulder. His medical team begged him to quit, but he continued on. For him, the scene came to represent his own identity. A guy who has always turned down a challenge, despite his body's pleas for him to do otherwise. He collaborated with Lancaster on one final film, which provided further context for the stunt. His 1991 film appearance was in The Secret, a film about adultery and the passage of time that mirrored some aspects of his own life. However, all came to a halt in 1996 due to a stroke that paralyzed half of his face and ruined his delivery. The general public thought he was done acting. Douglas was not going to have any of it. Relearning how to talk took him months. The year 1999, he made an appearance in Diamonds alongside his grandkids, incorporating his speech impairment into his character. It transformed the audience because it felt authentic. It Runs in the Family, 2003, his last feature picture, displayed his entire life story. His grandson and son were his co-stars, and declined to conceal his deafness.